Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an airline pilot, and welcome to tutorial number 1 for the iniBuilds A310 in Microsoft Flight Simulator. In this tutorial we will carry out the preliminary cockpit preparation and the flight deck preparation in accordance with the iniBuilds manual that has been included with the A310. I am not going to cover decisions like the fuel decision in this one, because I have covered those in my 737 tutorial range a few months ago, so if you are interested in that, I recommend to have a look into that tutorial, which is basically applicable to any aircraft. To start off, the first thing to do is turn the batteries on. You find them on the electrical power panel up here, and this is where they are. And all 3 batteries go to on. The hydraulic panel is checked. Most importantly, check that the pressure is within the green band and that the pumps are actually on auto and showing the low pressure lights. Make sure that the electric pumps and PTUs are currently not engaged. Wiper switches off. You can find them down here, and they're both showing off. Gear lever down, which is down here. Slat flap handle in agreement, so the handle is up and the indicator is showing that the slats and flaps are up as well. Reverse thrust lever down, those up in the front over here. Fuel levers off. Weather radar down here is off, so in the middle position. And APU fire test. So press the script test button. The APU fire panel is up here. So we're going to carry out both tests, the loop test and the script test. Both of which are working. If you have an external power available, it can be connected at this point, so if the green avail light is showing up here, we can connect our external power. The APU can then be started as needed. If you do need to start the APU, switch the inner tank pump number 2 on, which is over here, and then you can turn the APU master switch on and press the APU start button. The APU does take quite some time in the A310 to start up, but we'll just about have to wait for those. In the meantime, we can proceed on, since we do have power established from the external power already. Switch the IRS mode selectors to nav. You find them on the top of the overhead panel, so one of them is here. Check the battery operating light is illuminated and then changes over to the align mode. The second one is here just to the right, and the last one is on the complete right side. Again, battery operating into align mode, and the same happens over here. On the inertial system display unit, make sure that present position is selected and the system display is set to number 1. Next up, the oxygen supply switch on the oxygen panel up here is going on, and the annunciator light can be tested. You find the test switch down here on the lower right of the overhead. Make sure that all the lights are illuminating. And that is the preliminary cockpit preparation completed. From here on, we will start our flight deck preparation with the FMC to confirm the currency of the data. So we're sitting in an A310-300, we have CF6 engines, and the database is within the current rate. So we see the Airline IRS message. So in order to do that, we have to go ahead to the init page, and then we enter our airport pair. Today we are flying from Munich towards Hamburg. Choose your company route as needed. We don't have one today, so we're just going to return. Verify that the latitude and longitude positions are correct. They are correct by default in the A310 already, and then press the Align IRS key. Now our IRS starts aligning, and while that is happening, we are going to carry out our overhead panel check, and during that ensure that all white lights past are actually extinguished. So we're going to start the scan of the overhead panel in the lower left, and then we'll go upwards. And as you can see, the panel is divided in different sections. So we have one section here, the next section here, the third section here, and so on. So, no smoking auto, seatbelts on, lights as needed. We have checked the hydraulic panel previously already. The sober control lights are all normal, but up here we turn on the ground control of the flight recorder, which enables the flight recorder to start recording everything that's going on in the pre-flight procedure. Normally it would only record everything from the engine start onwards. Next up, we started the lights. The strobe lights go to auto, nav and logo light to 1. Now go up, anti-ice is off. We turn the 2 ATS buttons on. We turn the yaw damper on. And if your IRS is aligned at this point, we would also turn the pitch trim on. But for now, as you can see, the IRS is not aligned, so they just go back to the off position. We power up our galley, probably the most important thing in the entire aircraft, so that we can get our warm coffee. And from here on, we continue. Check that no lights are illuminated. We can carry out the fire test for the engine number 1. On the electrical indicator panel, verify that emergency and essential are selected. And now we will go on to the next panel, which is the APU panel. APU is started, wipers are off, ignition off, verify that the fuel quantity is sufficient for our flight, extinguish all the lights on the fuel pump panel, in other words, put all the fuel pumps to auto, make sure that the crossfeed is closed, and if you do plan to do a flight using ETOPS regulations, so basically if you are flying more than 60 minutes away from any alternate airport, then do check that the crossfeeds operates correctly as well. And make sure that all the lines going to the engines and the APU are actually illuminated. From here on, we have already carried out our fire test. The landing gear is showing down. We can test our cockpit voice recorder. So watch how the indication is going up here. Let's go further down to the next side. We have System 1 selected on the air conditioning panel. The rate is in normal. The manual mode is off. Next up to the window heaters. All of them go on, and the probe heat as well. Make sure that the cargo compartment smoke detectors are guarded. Oxygen pressure is positive. And we can do the fire test on the right-hand engine. So always do both the loop test as well as the squib test. Going up from here, the HF radios are not really necessary for Microsoft Flight Simulator operation, that's why the buttons aren't pressable. Finally, we go on to the air conditioning panel. The emergency lights are armed, annunciator, bright in daylight, dim at night. APU bleed. We have started the APU, so we can turn the APU bleed on. If you do that, verify that the lines are operating. And remember, if the APU bleed was off at this moment, then we would not see the pack lights and the crossfeed would be closed. If the APU bleed is on, then we do see the lines. Select Ecam flow mode if you have less than a certain number of passengers on board. Now, the manual does not specify exactly how many passengers those are supposed to be, so we'll just have to take it from here, but in the vast majority of cases Ecam flow can be used, so it can be selected on. Make sure that CRT is selected up here, and finally make sure the temperature selectors are all in the auto position. Isolation valves are not illuminated. And that completes the scan of the overhead panel. We'll continue on the main panel up here. Make sure the flight directors are switched to on. Select something usable on the navigation display. So for us, minimum range is going to do. You are supposed to select the range on the navigation display so that you can at least see the first waypoint, or as required for weather radar operations. Don't be surprised if the FCU does not indicate anything yet. That is normal for as long as the pitch trim switches are turned off. So we will only get an indication on the FCU as soon as the IRSs are fully aligned. Which means that there is nothing we can do up here yet. All we can do, select some modes for the navigation display. On the right side, verify that the flight directors are also turned on. And make sure that your nav switches over here are set to the nav position on both sides. We'll go down towards the main panel. Make sure that your QNH is set. Personally, I would always recommend to set the minimum bug here to the airfield elevation, as it does really help determining your height above the departure airport in the climb. Make sure that the time indicated is correct. Going on, we do have our braking and anti-skid turned on. Now, we are going to skip over the anti-skid test for the purpose of this tutorial, since it is only done on the first flight of the day. But what you would do there is set the braking to alternate, release the parking brake, and make sure that the brake pressure pedals are giving you a decent brake pressure. When that is done, release the brakes again, set your parking brake, and be sure to put the switch back to the normal position. Auto brake is off. On our thrust modes, we can't select anything yet since the IRS is not aligned. Carry out the gear warning test by basically pressing the switch, and we get the landing gear unsafe warning. Let go of the switch again. Brake fans are turned off, and on the first officer's panel the QNH is correctly set as well. Going down to the pedestal, not a whole lot that we can do down here. So the speed brake is stowed and not armed. Thrust is in idle. Flap slat lever in agreement with the indicator up here. Going down, we can select our frequencies as applicable for the flight. Make sure the TCAS is set to above, on standby. And if you're flying from the left seat, select transponder 1. If you're flying from the right seat, select transponder 2. The brightness of our two main displays up here is turned up and set to a decent level. Let's do a quick recall on the Ecam. We see everything is normal, so we can clear that one. Or at least we should be able to. Here we go. Do a quick check of all the system pages. So for the engines, we do have sufficient oil quantity available. Everything is indicating green except for stuff like the oil pressure that is supposed to be 0 at the moment. Onto the hydraulic pages. Here as well, make sure that we have sufficient hydraulic quantity indication. On the electrical panels, verify again that only things are shown amber that are supposed to be shown amber, which primarily is the generator voltage, as we can see. Same for the DC panel. Not a lot to check on the bleed panel. It's normal that the valves here are currently off because the engine bleeds are currently not providing any bleed, but we can see how the APU is currently providing bleed air, so the system schematic is showing that really well. The APU is powering both packs through the isolation valve. Air conditioning panel. Make sure we do have decent temperatures inside the aircraft. This is the latest moment where you should notice if the temperatures in the cabin are much too high, so where you should start your APU or get other means of air conditioning to bring the cabin temperatures down to a decent amount. Pressure panel. The outflow valves are fully open as expected. Cabin differential pressure is 0 on the ground, and the cabin altitude equals the airport elevation. We're in Munich, so 1,490 feet does absolutely make sense. Fuel panel. Note that we have sufficient fuel loaded for the flight. Now, in our case, we have not actually loaded our airplane yet. We are going to do that once we have finished the panel scan flow over here. Over to the APU. The APU is running, APU generator is producing voltage, and the bleed air is also turned on. Flight control page. Nothing to note here yet, the hydraulic system is currently not powered, that's why we're seeing all amber indications. Door page, that's the default, showing us which doors are currently open or closed. So we have already all doors closed in preparation for our flight. And finally we go on to the wheel page. Up here, the most interesting indication for us actually is the brake temperature. So currently our brakes are showing 15 degrees, and when you are checking this, make sure that the brake temperature is within certain limits. Most notably, that means that the brakes are not showing any amber indication, otherwise the brake time would be required. And I might be mistaken on the value, I believe it is 155 degrees under which the indication has to be in order for dispatch to be allowable. But don't quote me on that number. Up here we have our trim. Make sure the rudder trim is indicating 0. Press the reset button once. Make sure that our brightness of the panels is set accordingly. Looking at the weather radar, it's supposed to be tilted upwards. 5 degrees is usually a good setting on the ground. And make sure that the mode selector is either in weather or in turbulence. And make especially sure it's not in the test mode. It is common that some crews might just about leave it in the test mode to kinda troll the next crew. If you do that and the next crew turns on the weather radar as you line up on the runway, then you are going to get the wind shear test, so you are going to get a wind shear indication. So be sure that your previous crew didn't leave you a small gift down here and that you're actually either in weather or in turbulence mode. Also, make sure the gain is in auto, so rotate it all the way to the left. And that basically concludes our panel scan. The final thing here is on the left hand side, set your lights as you desire and make sure that there are no lights indicated or illuminated up here, and also on the first officer's side over here. Now we have completed the panel scan. The final thing we have to do now that the IRSs are aligned, we are going to switch on the pitch trim, which is also going to illuminate our FCU and our thrust mode computer. Now, on the FCU, let's set our initial climb. If you press the upwards arrow here, you can set it in thousands. So for us, 70 is going to be the initial climb. The runway heading 259 or 260 is already set. The autopilot is off. The last thing we have to do is to set our landing field elevation. Now we are going to fly to Hamburg today, and it is actually set to 0 already, which equals Hamburg's airfield elevation. Before we are going to close this video, let's have a quick look into our EFB and actually load up our aircraft. And to do that, we have our weight and balance screen down here. Now we can go ahead and load whatever we need. For our flight to Hamburg, let's have a quick look into the operational flight plan, which I have active in SimToolKitPro. And the flight plan itself is generated using SimBrief as the dispatching software, as I do believe SimBrief to be the best that is currently available for Flight Simulator. There is a SimBrief profile available in the iniBuilds forum if you do want to catch up with it as well. So, we're supposed to have a zero fuel weight of 102.8 tons. The fuel required for our route is 8.5 tons, and we always want to load a little bit more. Something that I like in SimToolKitPro as well is the load sheet button, which tells us we have 234 passengers planned, so we can already insert 234 passengers up here. Tiny bit less is also alright. You usually have some passengers that don't show up for your flights. And finally, we set that in our flight plan we are planned at a zero fuel weight of 102.8 tons. So let's bring up the cargo until the zero fuel weight box up here shows 102.8. And here we go, rounded up, that's 102.8. Finally, we have to decide on the amount of fuel that we want to take. So we're flying with good weather conditions today. We're planned at 8.5 tons of fuel. Let's round that up a little bit and we'll take 8.6. Now the slider is not exactly easy to move, so if we end up with a little bit more than that, like this, 8.7, that is totally fine. Click apply, make sure that you're in plan mode here. You can use the live mode if you want to, but click apply. And my final cross-check that I always conduct in order to make sure that we actually have our aircraft correctly loaded is to have a look into the Ecams, make sure our fuel down here is now showing 8.7 tons. That concludes the flight deck inspection, and next up is going to be our FMC setup, but that is going to be a topic for another video. For now, thank you very much for watching, and I'm looking forward to see you all on the next one. If you do want to support the channel, leave a like, comment, subscribe if you haven't done so yet, and finally, if you really want to support it and love the videos I'm doing, there is a Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you very much for your attention, and see you all again on the next one.